The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall. Ambassador Kang Dae-ho walked forward with steady steps, his black diplomatic uniform sharp against the alien architecture around him. Behind him, 2 human guards in dress blues followed at a respectful distance. Their faces showed no emotion, but their eyes were alert. The chamber was enormous. Thousands of alien beings filled the curved seats that rose up like a giant bowl. Some creatures floated in energy fields. Others sat on strange chairs made for bodies humans had never seen before. The air hummed with translation devices and the whispers of 100 different languages. At the center of it all stood the speaker's platform, where Dae-ho now found himself. Above him, holographic displays showed his face to every corner of the chamber. He could feel thousands of alien eyes watching him, judging him, already knowing what they planned to do. Chancellor Thexmore of the Velthari Empire rose from his crystal throne. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow in the chamber's light. His forearms moved gracefully as he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. Ambassador Kang Dae-ho of the human species, Thexmore began, his words translated instantly into every language in the chamber. You stand before this council to answer for the crimes of your people. Dae-ho said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was often the best response when dealing with beings who had already made up their minds. Speaker Veltan of the Crystalline Collective stepped forward. Unlike Thexmore, Veltan was made of living crystal that reflected light in rainbow patterns. When it spoke, the sound was like wind chimes mixed with the hum of computers. The charges are clear, Veltan announced. Humanity has shown itself to be violent beyond acceptable limits. Your species refuses to follow proper diplomatic procedures. You question authority when you should obey. You bring chaos where there should be order. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Dae-ho noticed that not all the sounds were supportive. Some species remained quiet, their representatives looking uncomfortable in their seats. Furthermore, Thexmore continued, humans have repeatedly ignored council regulations regarding military engagement. Your so-called peacekeeping forces use tactics that civilized species consider barbaric. Dae-ho finally spoke. His voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the vast space. Could the Chancellor provide specific examples of these barbaric tactics? The Siege of Corinth 7, Thexmore replied immediately. Your forces ended a 3-year conflict in 6 hours by attacking both sides simultaneously, then forcing them to negotiate while their fleets were disabled. Yes, Dae-ho said simply. We stopped the fighting and saved millions of lives. You violated the sovereignty of 2 independent nations. Veltan's crystal form pulsed with angry light. The proper procedure was to file diplomatic protests through 17 different committees over a period of no less than 2 years. While millions died, Dae-ho pointed out, death is acceptable when proper procedures are followed, Thexmore declared. Chaos is not acceptable under any circumstances. From her position in the observation deck, Dr. Kim Hye-jin watched the proceedings with growing unease. As humanity's chief expert on alien psychology, she could read the subtle signs that the council members were missing. The Draknari representative kept touching his throat, a sign of nervousness in his species. The Zephyrian delegation had arranged themselves in a defensive circle. Even some of the Velthari nobles looked uncomfortable with their chancellor's words. Captain Park Bo-ram stood on the bridge of the starship Indomitable, watching the live broadcast from the council chambers. Her crew worked quietly at their stations, but she could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew what was coming. Captain, her communications officer reported, we're receiving private messages from 17 different species. They're expressing concern about the proceedings. Any official protests? Bo-ram asked. No, ma'am. All unofficial channels. Boram nodded grimly. Even the alien species that disagreed with the council were too afraid to speak openly. That told her everything she needed to know about how the council really operated. Back in the chamber, the formal accusations continued. Species after species stood to list humanity's crimes against galactic order. The hegemony of Kethvar complained that human traders refused to pay proper bribes to customs officials. The Thaxian Empire was angry that human diplomats had exposed corruption in their colonial administration. The Andromedan Consortium claimed that human scientists shared their research freely instead of selling it at proper prices. Deho listened to each accusation with the same calm expression. When the last speaker finished, Chancellor Thexmore stood once again. "The evidence is overwhelming," he declared. "Humanity is a cancer in the body of galactic civilization. You bring disorder where there should be peace. You question wisdom where there should be obedience. You act on emotion where there should be logic." "The Council has reached its decision," Veltan announced. The crystal being's form pulsed with each word. "Humanity is hereby expelled from galactic civilization. You have 30 standard days to remove all human presence from any world beyond your home system. Any human found in civilized space after that time will be treated as a hostile invader." The chamber erupted in noise. Some species cheered, others remained silent. A few made what sounded like protests, but they were quickly drowned out by the majority. Deho waited for the noise to die down. Then he stepped forward to the very edge of the platform. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but somehow reached every corner of the vast chamber. "I have served as Earth's ambassador to this council for 15 years, he said. "In that time, I have watched you mistake fear for wisdom, control for peace, and stagnation for stability." Thexmore's forearms gestured angrily. "You dare insult this council?" "I state facts," Deho replied. "You call us violent because we fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. You call us chaotic because we refuse to let injustice continue, while committees debate proper procedures. You call us dangerous because we ask questions you cannot answer." Dr. Kim Hye-jin watched as several alien representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Her trained eye caught micro-expressions that revealed fear, doubt, and even agreement with the human ambassador's words. "You are banishing us because you fear what we represent," Deho continued. "Not chaos, but change. Not violence, but justice. Not questions, but growth." "Enough," Thexmore shouted. "You will leave this chamber and never return." Deho bowed, formally to the assembly. It was a gesture of respect that many of the aliens recognized, despite their different cultures. "We will leave as you command, but remember this day, honored representatives. You are not sending us away to protect the galaxy from humanity. You are sending us away to protect humanity from what the galaxy is becoming." With those words, Ambassador Kang Dai-ho turned and walked from the chamber. His guards fell into step. Behind him, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. As the massive doors closed behind them, the real consequences of the Council's decision began to unfold across the galaxy. The age of human exile had begun, and with it, the countdown to the Council's own destruction. 5 years had passed since the Great Banishment. The galaxy had expected humanity to quietly disappear into their small corner of space, broken and defeated. Instead, something remarkable was happening in the places where humans had been forced to go. Commander Lee Tae-min stood on the observation deck of New Seoul Station, watching the sunrise over Kepler 442b. The planet stretched out below him, its surface covered in a thin layer of ice that sparkled like diamonds. When the Council had given humanity a list of worlds they could keep, this frozen rock had been at the top. The aliens had called it worthless, a place where no intelligent life could survive. They had been wrong about that, like so many other things. "Construction report, Commander," his assistant said, handing him a data pad. Lee reviewed the numbers with satisfaction. In 5 years, humans had built 17 major cities on this world. Each one was a marvel of engineering, designed to work with the planet's harsh environment instead of fighting against it. The geothermal power plants alone were revolutionary. Human engineers had figured out how to tap the planet's core heat in ways that actually made the surface warmer. Now, instead of the deadly cold the Council had warned about, much of Kepler 442b enjoyed a climate similar to Earth's northern regions. "How are the crop yields?" Lee asked. "Better than expected, sir. The modified wheat is growing well in the heated zones, and the icefish farms are producing more protein than we can use." Lee smiled. Icefish were creatures native to this world that the Council had dismissed as useless. Human biologists had discovered they were not only edible, but incredibly nutritious. What the aliens saw as a dead world, humans had turned into a thriving home. Meanwhile, in the research station orbiting Jupiter, Dr. Choi So-young was making discoveries that would change everything. Cut off from the galactic communication networks, humanity had been forced to develop their own systems. What they created was far better than anything the Council used. "Run the test again," Choi told her team. They were working on a new type of faster-than-light communication that didn't rely on the quantum gates controlled by Council space. Instead, it used something humans called tunnel waves, a phenomenon that existed in the empty space between galaxies. The test results appeared on the main screen. Messages sent using tunnel waves traveled instantly across any distance, with no delay and no way for outside forces to block or intercept them. It was like having a private conversation across the entire universe. "This is incredible," said one of her researchers. "We can talk to any human colony instantly, no matter how far away they are." "More than that," Choi replied, studying the data. "This system is completely invisible to Council monitoring equipment. They have no idea these communications even exist." The implications were staggering. While the Council thought humanity was isolated and cut off, humans were actually more connected than ever before. Every human settlement, every ship, every research station could communicate instantly and secretly. In the hidden shipyards of the Kuiper Belt, Admiral Yoon Ji-hoon watched as the latest human warship took shape. The vessel looked nothing like the standardized designs used by Council fleets. Instead of the smooth, elegant curves favored by alien architects, human ships were built for function over beauty. "Status report, Admiral," Captain Park Boram said as she approached. She had been promoted after her actions during the evacuation and now served as Yoon's chief of operations. "The Ghost-class destroyers are ahead of schedule," Yoon replied. "We'll have 20 of them operational within 6 months." Boram studied the ship through the observation window. It was covered in strange angles and irregular surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "The stealth systems are that good?" "Better than good. These ships are invisible to every type of sensor the Council uses. They can slip past entire fleets without being detected. But stealth was just the beginning. Human weapons designers had created systems that worked on entirely different principles than Council technology. Instead of energy beams that could be deflected by shields, human ships used kinetic projectiles that punched through defenses like they weren't there. Instead of missiles that followed predictable paths, they used swarm weapons that adapted and learned as they flew. The Council had expected humanity to become weaker in exile. Instead, freed from the restrictions of galactic law, human creativity had exploded in directions the aliens never imagined. On a listening post hidden in the darkness between stars, Intelligence Officer Han Na-ri monitored communications from across the galaxy. What she heard was troubling. The perfect order the Council claimed to maintain was starting to crack. "Another trade dispute between the Thaxians and the Kethvar," she reported to her supervisor. "They're arguing over mining rights in the Vega system." "How long has this been going on?" he asked. 4 months. Before the banishment, human mediators would have resolved it in a week. That was the pattern Nari saw everywhere. Small conflicts that should have been easily resolved were dragging on for months. Trade agreements fell apart over minor details. Border disputes escalated into military buildups. The careful balance that had kept galactic civilization stable was falling apart. The first real war broke out in the 7th month of the 5th year. The Thaxian Empire and the hegemony of Kethvar had been arguing over a chain of mining worlds, for so long that both sides had forgotten what started the dispute. When Thaxian ships fired on a Kethvar convoy, the conflict exploded across 3 star systems. In the old days, human peacekeepers would have intervened immediately. They would have forced both sides to stop fighting while diplomats worked out a solution. But humans were gone, banished to their distant worlds, and the Council's own peacekeeping forces were designed for police actions against primitive worlds, not wars between major powers. The fighting lasted 8 months. Entire planets were bombed into ruin. Billions of civilians died or became refugees. When it finally ended, both the Thaxian Empire and the Kethvar hegemony were shadows of their former selves, weakened and bitter. Dr. Kim Hee-jin, now working from a research facility on Mars, studied the reports from the war with growing concern. As humanity's leading expert on alien psychology, she could see patterns that others missed. They're losing their ability to adapt, she told her staff during their weekly meeting. Look at these battle reports. Both sides used the same tactics throughout the entire war. No innovation, no creative thinking, just rigid adherence to their military doctrines. What does that mean for the galaxy? One of her researchers asked. It means the Council has created a perfect trap for themselves, Kim replied. They've built a civilization based on order and conformity. Everyone follows the rules, everyone thinks the same way, everyone acts predictably. It worked as long as humans were there to provide the chaos and creativity that keeps a society alive. And now? Now they're dying. Slowly, quietly, but inevitably. They just don't know it yet. Back on Earth, President Moon Jae-wook met with his advisors in the rebuilt United Nations building. The old flags of Earth's nations still hung in the assembly hall, but now they were joined by new banners representing the human colonies scattered across the galaxy. The reports from our intelligence networks are clear, Representative Lim Soo-jin told the assembled leaders. Council space is becoming more unstable every month. Some of our people want to intervene, to help prevent the wars and suffering. And, what do you think? Moon asked. I think we need to be patient. The Council made their choice when they banished us. Now they have to live with the consequences. But even as human leaders spoke of patience, preparations for a different future were already underway. In secret facilities across human space, scientists worked on cures for diseases that hadn't been invented yet. Engineers designed ships that could carry humanitarian aid to entire worlds. Diplomats studied the cultures and languages of 100 alien species, preparing for the day when their skills would be needed again. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was ready for whatever came next. The Council had meant to weaken them with exile. Instead, they had given humanity the freedom to become something new, something stronger, something the galaxy would desperately need in the dark days ahead. The long exile was ending, whether the Council knew it or not. The emergency session bell rang through the Council chambers for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Speaker Veltan's crystal form flickered with stress patterns as representatives hurried to their seats. The perfect order that had defined Galactic. Civilization for centuries was crumbling faster than anyone had expected. Chancellor Thexmore stood at his crystal podium, his 4 arms trembling slightly. Dark circles under his eyes showed he had not slept well in months. Around him, the great chamber that had once held thousands of representatives now looked half empty. Many species had withdrawn from council meetings, dealing with their own internal problems. The situation in the Outer Rim has grown worse, Thexmore announced. His voice, once strong and commanding, now carried a note of desperation. The Draconis rebellion has spread to 12 more systems. 3 member species have declared independence from Council authority. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembled aliens. The Draconis had always been among the Council's most loyal subjects. If they were rebelling, it meant the foundations of galactic order were truly failing. "What measures are being taken?" asked Representative Zixtar of the Andromedans. His tentacles writhed with anxiety as he spoke. "Our peacekeeping forces are stretched beyond capacity," Veltan replied. "The mathematical models suggest we need at least 4 times our current military strength to maintain order across all Council territories." What neither of them said, but everyone understood, was that the Council's military had been designed for simple police work. They were meant to intimidate primitive worlds into compliance, not fight actual wars against organized opponents. The tactics that had worked for centuries were useless against enemies who fought back effectively. On Earth, President Moon Jae-wook sat in his office reading the intelligence reports that arrived daily through humanity's secret communication networks. The news from Council space grew worse each week. Wars, rebellions, economic collapse, and social breakdown were spreading like a disease through the galaxy. "The hegemony of Kethvar has split into 7 different factions," reported Intelligence Director Park Min-ho as he briefed the president. "They're fighting each other over the remains of their territory. The death toll is approaching 50 million. And the Council's response? They sent a diplomatic protest. 3 committees are studying the situation. They expect to have a preliminary report ready in 18 months. Moon shook his head sadly. 18 months. In 18 months, there won't be anything left of the Kethvar to save. But the worst news was yet to come. In a secret laboratory on SciFiPrime, Dr. Thexacol had been working on what he believed would be the ultimate solution to the galaxy's problems. If chaos was the enemy of order, then he would create perfect order by eliminating the biological basis for chaos itself. The Zephyrian Plague, as it would later be known, was supposed to be a gentle genetic modifier. It would target the specific brain structures that caused beings to question authority, to act on emotion instead of logic, to choose change over stability. Dr. Thexacol believed he could create a galaxy of perfectly obedient citizens who would never again threaten the peace. The first test was conducted on volunteers from the Veltari military. The results seemed promising. Treated subjects became calm, obedient, and focused entirely on following orders. They stopped asking questions, stopped showing creativity, and stopped causing problems. Dr. Thexacol was so pleased with the results that he recommended immediate widespread deployment. Within weeks, atmospheric processors on dozens of worlds were releasing the plague into the air. The Veltari saw it as medicine that would cure the galaxy of its disease of disorder. They didn't realize they had created something far worse than any rebellion. Dr. Kim Hyejin was studying genetic samples in her laboratory on Mars when she first noticed the strange patterns. Human intelligence networks had managed to acquire biological samples from several Council worlds, and what she found in them made her blood run cold. "This is impossible," she whispered as she looked at the genetic analysis results for the 3rd time. The alien DNA showed signs of rapid modification, but not natural evolution. Someone had deliberately altered the genetic structure of multiple species simultaneously. She called an emergency meeting with the Terran Federation's top scientists and military leaders. Within hours, experts from across human space were connected through the secret quantum communication network. "The modifications target genetic diversity," Kim explained as she shared her findings. "Whatever this plague is, it's designed to eliminate the biological basis for independent thought and creative problem-solving." Admiral Yoon Ji-hoon studied the data with a military officer's eye for strategic implications. "How effective is it?" "Terrifyingly effective. Look at these intelligence reports from the past 6 months. Council military units are showing decreased Tactical flexibility. Diplomatic negotiations are breaking down because negotiators can't think of creative solutions. Even basic research and development has slowed dramatically across Council space. They're lobotomizing their own people, President Moon said quietly. Worse than that, Kim replied. They're destroying the very qualities that keep a civilization alive. Innovation, adaptation, the ability to face new challenges with new solutions. They're turning themselves into biological machines. The irony was devastating. The Council had banished humanity for being too chaotic, too unpredictable, too willing to question authority. Now they were systematically eliminating those same qualities from their own people, not realizing that those qualities were exactly what had kept galactic civilization stable for so long. But there was even worse news coming. The plague wasn't just affecting behavior, it was killing people. The genetic modifications that were supposed to create perfect obedience were also destroying immune systems. Species that had been genetically improved over centuries, their natural genetic diversity bred out in favor of supposedly superior traits, had no defense against a plague designed to target their specific genetic markers. The death toll began, slowly. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Council health officials dismissed the deaths as unrelated incidents. But as weeks turned to months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Entire populations were beginning to die. Representative Lim Soo-jin stood before the Terran Federation Assembly on Luna, reading casualty reports that grew more horrific each day. The Velthari Empire has lost 30% of its population in the past 4 months. The Crystalline Collective is reporting similar losses. At least 6 minor species have been completely extinct. And they still haven't asked for our help? Asked Assembly Member Ko Yoon-ji. Their pride won't let them. Chancellor Thexmore issued a statement yesterday calling the plague a temporary adjustment period that will ultimately strengthen galactic civilization. Admiral Yoon Ji-hoon had been monitoring Council military communications, and what he heard was terrifying. Their armed forces are collapsing, not just from the plague, but from complete inability to adapt to changing situations. I've seen battle, reports where Council commanders repeated the same failed tactics for weeks, even when it was clear they weren't working. It's like watching a computer try to solve a problem it wasn't programmed for, Dr. Kim Hya-jin added. They keep running the same routine over and over, expecting different results. The galaxy was dying, and the Council was powerless to stop. Worse, they were actively making it worse with every decision they made. Every new regulation, every rigid procedure, every attempt to impose more order just accelerated the collapse. Human observers watched in horror as civilizations that had existed for thousands of years crumbled in a matter of months. The Thaxian Empire fragmented into warring city-states. The Andromedan Consortium's trade networks collapsed as member worlds stopped trusting each other. Ancient alliances fell apart as species became unable to negotiate or compromise. The Council had created a perfect trap for themselves. In their quest to eliminate chaos, they had eliminated their own ability to survive in a chaotic universe. Like a garden that had been so carefully tended that it could no longer survive without constant human care, galactic civilization was withering and dying, and still their pride would not let them ask for help from the humans they had banished. But help was coming anyway. In secret facilities across human space, scientists worked frantically to develop a cure for the Zephyrian plague. Military commanders prepared humanitarian missions to save refugee populations. Diplomats studied the languages and customs of species they might need to evacuate. The galaxy had rejected humanity's offer of partnership. Soon, they would need humanity's mercy. And despite everything the Council had done, despite the years of exile and contempt, humanity was preparing to give it to them. The War of Seven Suns had begun 3 months ago, and already it was clear that galactic civilization was dying. From his crystal tower on SciFiPrime, Chancellor Thexmore watched the reports stream in from across Council space. Every day brought news of new battles, new rebellions, new worlds falling into chaos. His own empire was crumbling around him. The Zephyrian plague had killed half his people, and those who remained were losing their ability to think for themselves. Military commanders waited for orders that never came because the command structure had collapsed. Scientists worked on the same failed experiments over and over, unable to conceive of new approaches. Even his own advisors sat in meetings, staring blankly at problems they could no longer solve. The Centauri Tertius colony has sent another distress. Call, reported General Thexnall, one of the few military leaders still capable of independent action. His genetic modifications had been less complete than others, leaving him with enough free will to be dangerous. What is their situation? Thexmore asked, though he already knew the answer would be grim. Mixed population of refugees from 17. Different species. They fled the fighting in the core worlds and established an unauthorized settlement. They're requesting food, medical supplies, and protection from raiders. Unauthorized settlement, Thexmore repeated slowly. In the old days, before the plague, before the wars, the Council would have sent humanitarian aid first and worried about legal status later. Now, all he could think about were regulations and proper procedures. They have no legal right to be there, he said finally. Send a fleet to remove them. Proper colonization permits must be obtained through the Bureau of Territorial Administration. General. Thexanol's eyes gleamed with something that might have been madness. And if they refuse to leave? Then they are criminals occupying Council territory illegally. Deal with them appropriately. What Thexmore didn't say, what he couldn't say because the plague had damaged his ability to think creatively, was that the Bureau of Territorial Administration had been destroyed 6 months ago when the Andromedan Consortium had bombed the administrative capital. There was no one left to issue colonization permits. The entire legal system that justified his order had ceased to exist, but General Thexnall understood the implications perfectly. To him, deal with them appropriately meant only one thing: far. Away, in the hidden monitoring station between stars, Intelligence Officer Han Nari watched the Council fleet movements with growing alarm. She had been tracking military communications for months, and the patterns were becoming clearer and more frightening. They're not trying to restore order anymore, she reported to Admiral Yoon Ji-hoon during their daily briefing. The Council forces are just killing everyone who doesn't follow their rules. What do you mean? Yoon asked, though he suspected he already knew. The siege of Arcturus Station last month. The Council fleet didn't try to negotiate or even demand surrender. They just started shooting. 17,000 civilians died, including children from 8 different species. And now? Now they're heading for Centauri Tertius. Intelligence suggests there are about 40,000 refugees there, including some humans who were stranded when the evacuation orders came through. Admiral Yoon felt his jaw tighten. Humans. His people, abandoned in Council space when the banishment was declared, now facing extermination by an alien military that had lost all sense of mercy or reason. Captain Park Bo-ram was already on the bridge of the stealth destroyer Shadow of Earth when the alert came through. She had been patrolling the edges of Council space for weeks, watching the collapse of galactic civilization and waiting for orders that never came. The official policy was clear. Observe only, do not engage. Humanity was still officially banished from galactic affairs. Any military action could be seen as an act of war, potentially bringing the Council's wrath down on all human colonies. But as she watched the tactical display showing General Thexnall's fleet approaching the refugee colony, policy seemed like a small thing compared to the lives at stake. Captain, her sensor officer reported, I'm reading multiple civilian signatures on the planet's surface. The Council fleet is taking attack positions. Any response from the colony? They're broadcasting surrender signals on all frequencies. They're offering to evacuate peacefully if given time to gather their belongings. And the Council fleet's response? No response, ma'am. They're charging weapons. Park Bo-ram stared at the display for a long moment. 40,000 innocent beings were about to die, and she had the power to stop it. Her ship was invisible to Council sensors, armed with weapons that could disable an entire fleet without killing a single person. She could end this siege in minutes. But her orders were clear. Observe only. Do not engage. Then the first shots were fired. The Council ships opened up with everything they had. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning refugee camps into balls of fire. The evacuation ships trying to lift off from the planet's surface were blown apart before they could reach space. Children's screams echoed across the communication channels before being cut short by explosions. "Captain," her tactical officer said quietly, "we could stop this." Park Boram watched a hospital ship explode on her screen, taking 300 wounded refugees with it. She thought about her orders, about policy, about the careful diplomatic balance that kept humanity safe in their exile. Then she thought about the oath she had taken when she joined the human fleet. To protect innocent life wherever she found it, regardless of species or politics. "All human vessels in range," she broadcast on the secret quantum network. "This is Shadow of Earth. I am declaring Directive 7. We have civilians under fire, and I will not stand by and watch them die." Directive 7 was the emergency protocol that overrode all other orders when innocent lives were at stake. It had been written by the Terran Federation specifically for situations like this, when doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Across the Centauri system, 12 other human ships received the signal and responded immediately. Stealth destroyers, fast attack craft, and even a hospital ship that had been secretly providing aid to refugees throughout Council space. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. General Thexanol's fleet never saw the human ships coming. The first sign of their presence was when the Council flagship's weapons suddenly went offline. Then the engines failed. Then the life support systems shut down to minimum power, just enough to keep the crew alive, but not enough to fight. One by one, every ship in the Council fleet found itself completely helpless. Their crews were unharmed, but their vessels were as useless as floating rocks. They couldn't move, couldn't shoot, couldn't even send messages for help. Meanwhile, human rescue ships were already landing on Centauri Tertius, evacuating the survivors and providing medical aid to the wounded. The operation was conducted with precision and efficiency that would have impressed even the old Council, back when they still cared about saving lives. General Thexanol himself was transported aboard the Shadow of Earth, where Captain Park Boram met him in the ship's conference room. The alien general looked around with wild eyes, unable to understand how his mighty fleet had been defeated so completely. "How?" was all he could say. "We remembered something your council chose to forget," Park Boram replied calmly. "The universe doesn't care about your rules. It only cares about what works." "You have violated galactic law," Thexanol snarled. The council will do nothing," Park Boram interrupted. "Because they can't do anything. Your civilization is dying, General. Your people are losing the ability to think, to adapt, to solve problems. In another year, there won't be enough of you left to matter." The news of the Centauri Tertius rescue spread through quantum channels faster than the Council could suppress it. Within hours, every intelligence service in the galaxy knew that humanity had returned to galactic affairs, and they had announced their presence by humiliating the Council's finest military commander. More importantly, refugees across Council. Space now knew that someone was still willing to help them. The human hospital ships that had been secretly operating in the outer systems suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with requests for assistance. Entire populations were begging for evacuation from worlds where the plague and the wars had made life impossible. On Earth, President Moon Jae-wook convened an emergency session of the Federation Assembly. The careful policy of non-interference was now in ruins, destroyed by a single captain's decision to save innocent lives. The question before us is simple, he told the assembled representatives. Do we maintain our isolation while the galaxy burns around us, or do we accept that our exile is over and begin the work of rebuilding what the Council has destroyed? Representative Lim Soo-jin stood to address the assembly. The Council banished us to punish us for our chaos and unpredictability. But chaos and unpredictability are exactly what the galaxy needs now. Without them, without us, galactic civilization will die completely. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was going back to work. The ruins of the old council chambers on Nexus Prime told the story of galactic civilization's collapse better than any history book. Half the Great Assembly Hall had been destroyed by bombing during the final rebellion. The crystal speakers, podiums were cracked and dark. Most of the seats that had once held thousands of representatives now stood empty, covered in dust and debris. But today, for the first time in over a year, beings from across the galaxy had come together in this broken place. They were not the same proud species that had banished humanity 6 years ago. These were the survivors, the refugees, the ones who had lived through wars and plagues and the death of everything they had once believed in. Ambassador Kang Dae-ho walked slowly through the damaged halls, his hair now completely white, but his steps still steady. He was no longer Earth's representative to a council that barely existed. Instead, he had been chosen by these surviving species to serve as mediator in what might be the galaxy's last chance for peace. Behind him came delegates from dozens of worlds. The proud Velthari Empire was represented by a single tired official whose people numbered in the thousands instead of billions. The crystalline collective had sent a small crystal being whose light was dim and flickering. Even the mighty Thaxian Empire was now just a collection of scattered colonies trying to survive. But there were new faces, too. Species that had never been allowed in the old council chambers now sat beside their former masters. The gray-skinned, miners from the outer rim who had been treated as slaves. The peaceful plant people who had been dismissed as unintelligent. The energy beings who had been ignored because they didn't have physical bodies the council could understand. Chancellor Thexmore sat in what had once been his place of honor, but now he was just another delegate among many. The plague had aged, him terribly. His once glowing skin was pale and marked with dark spots. His forearms shook when he tried to move them. Worst of all, his eyes showed the vacant stare of someone whose mind had been damaged by the very weapon his people had created. Dr. Kim Hae-jin stood at the center of the assembly, holding a data tablet that contained hope for the entire galaxy. After months of desperate research, working with scientists from 17 different species, they had finally created a cure for the Zephyrian plague. The treatment will reverse the genetic damage, she explained to the gathered delegates. But it cannot be mass-produced using council technology. The manufacturing process requires biological systems that your people eliminated generations ago in favor of more efficient artificial methods. "What are you saying?" asked the crystalline representative, its voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying the cure can only be made using human genetic diversity. Our inferior, unmodified biology is the key to saving your people." The irony was devastating. The same chaotic genetics that the Council had condemned as primitive and dangerous were now the only thing that could save galactic civilization from extinction. But Kim wasn't finished. "The cure will work, but it comes with a price." "It doesn't. Just remove the plague's effects. It restores the natural genetic diversity your species had before centuries of improvements. Your people will become more like they were in ancient times. More emotional, more creative, more unpredictable, more human," Chancellor Thexmore said quietly, and for the first time in months, there was something like understanding in his damaged mind. President Moon Jae-wook addressed the assembly through a holographic projection from Earth. His words were translated into dozens of languages, but their meaning was clear to everyone present. 6 years ago, you banished us for being too chaotic, too emotional, too willing to question authority. You were right about all of those things. We are chaotic. We are emotional. We do question authority when it fails to serve the people it claims to protect." He paused, looking out at the faces of beings who had once looked down on humanity with contempt and now listened to every word with desperate hope. "But you were wrong about one thing. You thought these qualities made us weak. Instead, they are what made the galaxy strong. Your perfect order was built on a foundation of human chaos, human creativity, human willingness to find new solutions to old problems. When you removed us, that foundation crumbled." Representative Lim Soo-jin stepped forward to address the practical questions that everyone was thinking, but afraid to ask. "The Terran Federation is prepared to provide the cure free of charge to any species that wants it. We will also provide humanitarian aid, disaster relief, and peacekeeping forces to help rebuild what has been lost. What do you want in return?" asked the Andromedan delegate, his tentacles writhing with suspicion. "Nothing," Lim replied simply. "We're not doing this for payment or political advantage. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do." The alien delegates stared at her in confusion. In their experience, no one ever helped without expecting something in return. The concept of aid without strings attached was foreign to beings who had been raised in a civilization built on rigid hierarchies and careful exchanges of favors. "You're lying," Chancellor Thexmore said, though his voice lacked conviction. "No species acts purely from altruism." Ambassador Kang Dae-ho smiled sadly. "That's the difference between us, Chancellor. You see altruism as impossible because your society bred it out of your people centuries ago. You created a perfect civilization where everyone calculated the exact value of every action. But perfection isn't life. Life is messy, chaotic, and yes, sometimes altruistic." Over the following weeks, the cure was distributed across the galaxy. Human medical ships visited world after world, treating the sick and helping populations rebuild their shattered societies. The process was slow and sometimes difficult, as beings who had lived their entire lives under rigid control struggled to adapt to having free will again. But gradually, the galaxy began to heal. The new agreement that emerged from the Nexus Prime. Meetings was nothing like the old council structure. Instead of a rigid hierarchy with humans at the bottom, it created a loose confederation where every species had an equal voice. Decisions were made through discussion and compromise rather than authoritarian decree. Humans were offered leadership positions, but they consistently declined. "Leadership isn't about ruling," Representative Lim explained to a gathering of newly free alien diplomats. "It's about serving. Every species here has something unique to contribute. Our job isn't to lead, but to make sure everyone's voice is heard." The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Some species struggled with their newfound freedom, and conflicts still arose between different groups. But now there were mechanisms in place to resolve disputes peacefully, and more importantly, there were beings willing to ask the difficult questions that prevented small problems from becoming galactic disasters. Admiral Yoon Ji-hoon, now in charge of the new galactic peacekeeping force, found his job very different from the old council's military operations. Instead of imposing order through force, his ships served as neutral mediators and humanitarian responders. When conflicts arose, they helped negotiate solutions rather than dictating terms. Captain Park Boram, promoted to Commodore after her actions at Centauri Tertius, commanded a mixed-species fleet that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Human ships flew alongside reformed Velthari vessels and crystalline constructs from the collective. Their crews worked together with an efficiency that amazed everyone, including themselves. Years passed, and the galaxy grew stronger. Trade flourished between species that had once viewed each other with suspicion. Scientific research advanced rapidly as different types of minds collaborated on problems that had seemed unsolvable. Art and culture bloomed as beings learned to appreciate beauty in forms they had never imagined. Dr. Kim Hya-jin established the Galactic Institute of Biological Diversity on Luna, where scientists from hundreds of species worked together to understand the complex relationships between genetics, culture, and consciousness. Her research showed that diversity wasn't just valuable, it was essential for any civilization that wanted to survive in an ever-changing universe. On a warm spring day, 50 years after the banishment, President Moon Jae-wook gave his final address to the Galactic Assembly. He was old now, his hair white and his steps slow, but his voice still carried the strength that had helped rebuild the galaxy. "When you banished us, you called us violent and chaotic and unpredictable," he said to the packed assembly hall. "You were right. We brought the violence of change to your stagnation, the chaos of growth to your perfection, and the unpredictability of hope to your despair." He looked out at the faces watching him, humans and aliens sitting together, their children playing. In the gardens outside, their futures intertwined in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. "You tried to create gods and instead created stagnation. We remained human and became legends. But the real legend isn't what we accomplished. It's what we learned together. That the greatest strength any civilization can have is the courage to keep changing, keep growing, keep asking the questions that make everyone uncomfortable." The applause that followed wasn't the polite, measured response of the old council chambers. It was chaotic,